Even after I was no longer employed by the state government in Melbourne, several ethnic families remained friends with me. Some even thought that I was still working there, and the Turks in particular were expecting me to assist them with their needs, interpreting English into their language. Amongst them, one middle-aged Turkish lady hated Armenians as she believed the stories historically told, which I have mentioned earlier. Her daughter Suren was separated from her aging husband, whom she was forced to marry by a traditional arrangement in Turkey. However, she was in love with another Turk, who preferred to change his identity and name to George. He was a tailor by trade, and the name he chose appealed to him. He spoke about his life being in danger for being involved with Susan, according to some Muslim traditions. In other words, he would be shot and killed. Efil, Susan's mother, was extremely unhappy about other people suspecting that I was allegedly an Armenian dog. She exclaimed that she would pluck out the eyes of any Armenian dog. I could not understand the motive behind this attitude, and was uninterested in knowing anything about it. When I met Susan and George, they told me all about their desire to settle in Western Australia and asked if I could help them. He had recently purchased a Mazda fitted with a rotary motor and said I could be their navigator. It was a good idea, that is, if we could share the expenses, and it could make journeying a long distance fun. After the final arrangements, very early one morning we set out for Western Australia. I became their guide. First, we headed towards Adelaide, under my direction, and spent some time there before travelling along the Nullarbor. When we had a minor problem with the fuel and stopped somewhere shortly after we emerged from the City of Cathedrals, we encountered a big-built biker from New Zealand who asked where we were going and obtained some diesel for us from one of the truckies. That was indeed a very nice surprise. Susan and George were stunned by this adventure towards Perth. However, it was ironic that a number of people were still discriminating against me. I was accepted as one of them by people in some parts of the world, whereas in others I was completely opposed to by a fierce, judgmental attitude. Indeed, I have traveled to almost every part of the world. In Peru, I was at first considered as a gringo, or an American, until I conversed with them, and a few elected to think of me as possibly Spanish, but I spoke with them in their native tongue, although imperfectly. I visited Peru many times, long after my marriage was no more. In the Philippines, some thought of me as being Spanish, Greek, or French. Nobody ever spoke of me being Armenian or Persian. In Germany, I was fiercely opposed to as being definitely Middle Eastern, a Turk of Muslim heritage, even by their government officers, which wrote down my identity without even having the common courtesy to ask me what background I was from. They recorded my origins as Turkish and Islam, supposedly making it easier for me, so that I did not struggle to figure out how correctly I should answer them about my true identity in their language. Was it not interesting and noble of them to write down my answers about who I was, my beliefs, or background, before I could even answer them? Some of them told me that there was no difference between an Armenian and Turk, that both were just the same. It was extremely unusual for those well-cultured Germans to know so much about people they encountered, and yet surely they were completely void of any knowledge of history and geography. Hearing something like that would most certainly infuriate Turks. However, when in Turkey, most of my associates claimed that I looked very much like a Jew or an Armenian, even European or French Armenian, by simply observing my distinct facial features. Anywhere in China, India, or Southeastern Asia, I was considered as being of a European background. In some parts of India, I was more Persian. In parts of the Philippines, I was from a background of foreign invaders or a holy man. In Indonesia, and particularly in Bali, I was generally thought of being from Iran, Iraq, and of Muslim background, wherein in Egypt I was either Alexandrian or of Indian descent. Polish, Russian, and people of former Yugoslavia, as well as Hungarians, thought of me as being either Russian Armenian or Gypsy. In truth, in communist bloc countries, I was more accepted and respected for being who I was than in Germany. In Britain, I experienced some opposition, as a number of people thought of me as a Jew, an Indian, or an Afghan. But many in London considered not only my looks, but by listening to my accent that I was most certainly French. In Germany, many preferred to stick to their guns, forever opposing me discriminately and naming me anew a dirty Turk, a Muslim terrorist, and a foreign bastard. They even sent a note to my then-wife shortly after our wedding to warn her about the possible consequences of marrying a Middle Eastern person of Islamic background. I know I have referred to this before. I had a soupçon of fear that such a note directed to her from a government authority would have a devastating effect on her unconscious mind years later. But if she truly loved me, it should have no influence. In Russia, France, and Spain, I was just one of them, and Italians never questioned me, for I lived and spoke just like them. However, in Australia, I literally had to force myself to be understood as to who or what I was, and not as they were guessing. Many Europeans living in Melbourne and Sydney considered me as one of them. Germans were still cautious with me, considering my identity being Jewish. I felt more at home with the French and Italians. Australian natives, bless them, accepted me as one of their white brothers, perhaps after discovering my willingness to get to know all about their culture. However, even in those countries where I was generally looked down on, as if belonging to a lower grade or subhuman culture, I aimed to make great friends. I would always smile with them and share their stories. After gaining their attention and interest upon their discovery of my intellectual and academic studies, with an unwavering desire to speak their language and understand their traditions, they accepted and appreciated my presence. Many were keen to get to know me better after discovering my background being mostly European, although some were still very cautious. The old stigma was still alive. According to thorough research, I am a surprising mixture. According to my DNA analysis, I am of mostly European, particularly French, partially Indian, and Armenian origin. During the past few centuries, there were many migrations between France and Russian Armenia, and some of my ancestors have fallen in love, settled in Europe, and married there. Others preferred to return to Armenia for wealthy businesses they conducted in the shipping industry, oil trade, and farming, until the 1915 atrocities we learn about in historic research. Some people have described my looks as extremely friendly, gentle, and lovable. Others have, due to their preconceived ideas, thought of me as someone to be very cautious of. I always tried to bring laughter to people, never wishing harm to anybody, and never engaging in activities to hurt any single human being. In the eyes of my wife, I was unworthy to be believed in or considered as a human being. I could not believe how she could so easily forget my European Armenian background due to her being falsely informed by those who claimed to know the truth, whereas they were completely void of it, at the same time making her believe that Jehovah's Witnesses were the only trustworthy people. Almost all of them considered me as a second-class human, originating from a Muslim Middle Eastern country. If you experience what I did with the witness ministerial servants and elders talking about the blacks being scheduled to become white men in the new world of perfection, you can easily discover their racially motivated separatist attitude. Maybe they should take note of Jesus' words, but I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. Matthew chapter 12, verse 36. However, they are well known to take part of one text from one of these scriptures and another from other parts to promote their ideas. Even my daughters did not accept me for who or what I was, due to their minds being influenced by their all-knowing friends and mother. But I do not need to accept what my daughters or their mother and friends popularly wanted to believe about my background. If they cannot accept me as I am, it is not a big deal or tragedy, for I will not change the reality. I am of a European Armenian origin and have lived partially in Turkey, but now I am proudly Australian. During my offspring's childhood, Australia was accepting migrants from Middle Eastern countries, including Turkey. The state and federal governments of Australia therefore provided funds for appropriate services to the community to develop and assist those migrants settle in Australia, find jobs, housing, and liaison between them and government authorities and health services. I was also happily involved in this service. In this role, I worked as a health and welfare liaison officer for the state government, apart from my tutoring duties. Through this occupation, I got to know many Turkish families, finding accommodation and helping them to find jobs, directing them to courses, which taught them language skills, as well as assisting their loved ones to unite with them through immigration. I was very friendly with them, and in return, they became very friendly with me. Occasionally, they invited me to their homes at weekends or on special celebrations to share their fun and barbecues, and my daughters had a marvelous time when I took them with me on those occasions. It was certainly educational. Nor can I ever forget the fun times we enjoyed at home on Sunday mornings with musical entertainment for children from the neighborhood, for it was all part of multicultural education and entertainment. All I wanted was to help my children and others accept all nationalities and cultures in this country. This was to lead them to accept people as they were, without discrimination. But some of those migrant friends did not need to know about my real background because of the unfortunate history they remembered, and my help could be nullified. There were a few rough rides ahead of me. Some Turks suspected that I might be Jewish, and worse still, being Armenian. Turks by nature resent Armenians in their country because of the historic events which they claim never happened. Although within Australia there was no need for any kind of discrimination and fierce opposition towards each other, for one hoped that both races were aiming at uniting as one in this vast country. Yet there were still people who hated others. Because I was assisting them caringly, they chose to oppose those who pointed a finger at me, and others accusing me of being an Armenian, as if being an Armenian was a crime, for they believed that I had to be a proper and genuine Turk with a Muslim background. According to gossip, some even thought that I was probably involved in spying activities. They all believed that Armenian dogs would never help a Muslim Turk in need. This may be why my daughters claimed that their father most certainly had to be a Muslim Turk, for he had many Turkish friends. He shared some of their activities, listened to their music, and spoke their language. Whatever has been supposedly explained to them by others who could only have been guessing, assuming, was not what I explained to my children and my once-upon-a-time wife about my origins. I do not think that their mother and friends helped them to know the real truth, as those people did not know anything about me. Is it not laughable that those who preached about the need not to judge anyone judged people like me amongst the many others without knowing a thing about them? There were also some who preferred to forget the help received altogether, and even exclaimed that they would be the very first ones to eradicate the Armenian dogs. Alas, there was great need to behave as one of them if one wanted to keep one's employment. This meant attending their celebrations, accepting their invitations, and listening to their music in some limited fashion, so that one could be regarded as one of them. This was the only way to get to know them better and assist them according to the rules laid down by the then government authority. Luckily, my musical interests have been very international. Unfortunately, in the eyes of my daughters, and particularly Birgit, as I have been informed many years later, I had to be a Turk because of my interest in things Turkish. Turks certainly have very colorful history and lifestyle, and their music and folklore can be equally fascinating. In other words, I admired Turkish history, music, and particularly cuisine. But I could not claim to be someone I was not. Yet my daughters were convinced I was what they have erroneously been told about me. This greatly saddened me. Although they had lived with me for a long while, they were incapable of understanding who I really was. In other words, under truly unrighteous and incorrect influence, they were adamant not to discover anything good about me. Maybe their attempt to surprise me by adding rat poison pellets in my coffee had something to do with it. I hoped I was wrong. However, I could not accept those claiming to know the truth, yet were full of lies and treachery. I found some comfort in the thought that my beloved daughters never had a chance to get to know me better. They never attempted to know anything about me, other than telling multiple untruths about my person, and those untruths became their integral wisdom. On the other hand, according to Birgit, who told me some years later, upon an accidental meeting, their mother would never tell lies, and she knew everything to be known about me. But did their mother know me at all? When Magda discovered my academic background, she could never accept it, interpreting my educational standpoint as an interest in psychic or occult science against God, without it being so. My practice of psychology was considered as the evil science of hypnosis, and nothing more. I dared not even try to explain anything, for fear of being understood completely against my personal principles. As I later discovered by listening to a number of witnesses, Magda believed I had to be of Muslim Turkish origin, never questioning anything and obviously forming her own opinions. Anybody from that background was expected to be very rough to their wives, giving them no freedom and treating them harshly. That allegedly could only be expected from somebody like me, as I was supposedly of that background. The Turks I have known were not like that, and that assumption was terribly erroneous. What they have been fed by a number of allegedly truth-loving witnesses was nothing short of lies. Magda never had the time or opportunity to get to know me, as she was always engrossed in her Bible studies. My life had become a huge boredom with her. Every time I tried to say something about Bible wisdom, or anything else during our last days together, she shouted at me words which were so stunning. "Get behind me, Satan! How dare you speak of God and God's holy word?" I was never given any chance to explain anything about myself and be understood. I am so happy to have recorded the occasion on tape, which never lies, for I wanted to keep a memory thereof without anticipating the kind of reaction I got. I believe that certain Jehovah's Witnesses took the situation as a great opportunity to further indoctrinate her against me, making her and our daughter Birgit believe that all witnesses were honest and truthful, whereas others like me, who were disfellowshipped, could only tell lies, just like their leader, Satan, the devil. They are well known for shunning others and doing everything possible to break families apart. It is a major part of their faith. Naturally, Magda, being their all-knowing mother, who never told lies, could successfully indoctrinate her daughters to believe that their father was a cheat and liar, apart from being a monster and charlatan. They were encouraged to choose Jehovah above all else and prove their loyalty by shunning the unfaithful. I only hope that she is happy with her achievements. I only hope that both her daughters are as she wanted them to be, great people, telling only the truth and living honest lives. After all the wonderful learning and study she has been subjected to throughout the years, it enabled her to describe me under a preconceived category. She probably known me better in her dreams than what I am in reality. Under direction from her beloved friends, she must have known that the girls would be led into the mom knows best syndrome. There is one simple action left for me, and that is to congratulate her on her great triumphs and successes. You are a great gem, Magda. Having arrived in Perth after those interesting experiences shared with George and Susan, and being shocked with a saltwater tea and coffee experience, we were now in the center of the city, where they also wondered where the actual city was. The very first words which came from George were, "This is the city which God had forsaken." However, it was easier for them to obtain emergency housing almost immediately somewhere in the surrounding suburbs. As a single person, I had to house myself and applied for a unit or small house through a group of real estate agents. On arrival, I quickly organized accommodation at one of the hotels on the outskirts of the city, which was well known to me. George and Susan were to sleep overnight in the hotel room without breakfast, and I was to sleep in the car for that night, although they insisted that I could sleep in a corner within the temporary accommodation. Being a very private person, I chose the car and believe they appreciated this sacrifice on my part. The next morning, after breakfast in the city, we went to the Department of Housing. A few necessary details considered, several official forms completed and signed with my assistance, we were given a couple of addresses to visit. A bus trip ensued, which took a considerable time. We finally arrived at the suburb of Kulbalap and were strictly advised to be very cautious when pronouncing this name in front of Aborigines, for it would be very offensive to them. After seeing the housing estate employees in their office and having inspected the property, which contained some basic furniture, George and Susan were very excited and happy to rent the house. They suggested that we could do some shopping locally and that I could stay at their new accommodation that night, or until I was housed. Since it was a weekend, I gratefully accepted their offer, but I was desperately in need to accommodate myself elsewhere and start doing my own thing. Besides, they needed their privacy. They insisted that I should stay there as long as I wanted, for they trusted me completely, but I took the challenge of traveling the long distance on the bus into the city, visiting real estate agents and having many cups of coffee at the Carillon. Some of the coffee lounges and restaurants I used to frequent have now sunk into the sandy ground after all these years. The whole city seems to have been built upon sand, and interestingly, the lower parts of almost all buildings and trees looked as if they were salt or iron oxide affected and colored orange-brown. Perth looked inviting and beautiful, although it had some very unusual aspects. I can never forget how a short indigenous man stood in front of me out of the blue while I was heading towards the Carillon, leaning on me as if wanting to kiss me, his face very close to mine, making me worried. I interpreted it as an insult to my person in a very native Australian way, which I was unfamiliar with. I could be really angry with him and be accused of being racist or give him a shock that he would never forget. Since I could not accept insult from anybody, I decided to give him a brotherly hug, during which he could not breathe. I told him he was my brother, and it was time to shock him, and amused several spectators. He smelt like beer and was begging if I could help him with some money, or panting due to shortness of breath he had just experienced. I told him that I had only recently arrived, but could probably help him later, if we met again. He reluctantly accepted that, and said, "You are a different fella. All of them fellas don't like us very much here." There was certainly a lot more to learn. It was going to be a very healthy move when I settled, probably close to the city, but what was I going to occupy myself with? Several interviews later, I moved into a beautiful and luxurious unit in Victoria Park, on a top floor facing the city. Shopping centres, dentists, and doctors were nearby. It was very reasonably priced and, in a sense, one of the upper-class areas of Perth. I visited George and Susan from time to time, while I got all my belongings and bedding, which were stored in Melbourne, which greatly helped me settle in Perth. But my only companion, my cat Blinky, was still the greatest joy when she arrived from Victoria. Almost every second day, Reg called me on the telephone, telling me all the news from there. Perth looked very promising, but I was told that in the middle of summer it was not so perfect. The grass had no chance to mature or remain green. The council gardeners usually had beach sand all over it, supposedly to protect it against the harsh sun. In actuality, the salt content destroyed it. I was told that rolls of green lawn grass were shipped from Victoria, but they did not last long, and many people preferred artificial grass, for it never needed any maintenance or watering, and remained green all year round. I am certain that things have changed since then, and the city became more beautiful. However, one could not help but notice how lush and healthy the grass in supporting areas was. The same could be seen in privately owned backyards, where people were growing a large variety of roses. There were numerous marketplaces resembling yesteryear's Wild West, filled with extreme kitsch, and a multitude of eateries, colorful clothing material, as well as most eccentric people. Many West Australians generally created an impression of having an easygoing lifestyle. Perth and surrounding suburbs were populated by either the very rich or the poorest of people. One could find almost everything from the latest fashion to many kinds of electronic goods. They were things one is accustomed to in the eastern states, and peculiarly, the public unusually tended to look down on people originating from the east. In fact, I was often preached about how beautiful the weather was in the West, where people disliked the others from the eastern states, until of course one bravely declared why he or she preferred to stay in this magnificent part of Australia. Interestingly, I was told by born and bred West Australians that living there could be very boring, lacking variety, yet a number of great thinkers, scientists, and the very rich dwelt in this part of Australia. There were many elite people, and also pretenders, like anywhere else within this vast land. I also met many native Australians. For some strange reason, we were warned by the local authority to be very discerning with the natives, as they sometimes entered into people's private properties, claiming that the land was theirs and therefore they could enter into any dwelling or anywhere as if everything belonged to them. Personally, I never experienced anything like that, in spite of encountering a large number of native folk. There were people begging, even demanding money, but many others were extremely friendly. I fail to understand why they were portrayed as doing undesirable things. According to information, some Europeans chose to marry Aboriginal ladies, but it was not my interest to marry again. However, I wanted to get to know them better and discover a little more about their rich history and traditions. Several people chose only to complain about them, especially in regard to the West Australian government, generously providing housing to their families only to have those properties destroyed, since they traditionally started a fire in the middle of the rooms and sometimes burned the place down, while also hurting themselves in the process. I was not sure about that, for I never encountered such destructive natives, while considering that destructive people could be found everywhere around the world. What I discovered was that those living in the neighborhood were well-behaved and always full of smiles. I suppose whatever we look for, we can always find, be it nice or nasty, good or violent, beautiful or ugly. I prefer to see the good in all things and in all people without any discrimination. My friends in Coolbellup soon met Turks living in other suburbs of Perth and introduced me to them. Although I got myself a great unit in Victoria Park, I felt the need to do something creative and applied for a tutoring position at one of the universities and came across an opportunity to start broadcasting for the local community as well as in a few foreign languages such as German and Turkish. Using this opportunity, I introduced a drive-time music program featuring listeners' requests. It was going to be once a week and involved several hours of studio work. In the meantime, some of my Turkish friends asked me to present regular Turkish language programs over the radio, the material for which was to be partially provided by Turkish radio and television in Ankara. Furthermore, their former Perth radio presenter had resigned. I accepted the challenge and started a few special programs, some of which I prepared at home, using my own professional recording equipment. One such program was about the history of music, particularly about the times of the Hittites and the great Ottoman Empire through the ages and its evolvement into modern days. Being non-religious, I preferred to present more folkloric and current styles of music, as well as the daily news, some current affairs, and sporting news. I even suggested creating a link with people's loved ones in their homeland, so that they could talk to each other over the radio. Before I started some of the Turkish programs, I was introduced as their new radio host by one of their club presidents, and there was much excitement in the air. Several months later, during one of their fundraising functions, I was told that even during their important celebrations, and particularly during their month of Ramadan, I had not presented them with anything religious, and there were no Quran-based prayer sessions. Unfortunately, they had not provided me with the appropriate audio material to broadcast, and I was unable to present anything like that other than rely on my own library. If they had the initiative to include one of their religious men of God, I could have included him, and everybody would be happy. I was only told to present their program in their tongue and utilize their music, and that was all I could do in the circumstances. I was praised as a very clear, systematic, and direct-to-the-point presenter. However, religious programming was very important to them. Therefore, I recommended that they should bring back their previous presenter instead of me. And although reluctant at first, they nevertheless accepted it. Now I could concentrate on hosting the programs I truly enjoyed. It was far better for me to remain neutral in regard to people's beliefs and religion. Circulating amongst artistic as well as eccentric people, I came across a few spiritually minded individuals, and with great curiosity about the workings of the human mind, discovered the existence of WAUFOIC club activities. This unusual title stands for West Australian UFO Investigation Group. They were ufologists searching for evidence of visitations from other worlds and realms. Since I was once a member of such a group in Victoria, I thought it would be good to discover what they had researched into and found in Western Australia. I frequented their meetings, making new friends who were keenly interested in observing the skies with or without their telescopes. There were those who believed they had encountered occupants of so-called UFOs visiting our world from other places and dimensions. The president of the club suggested that one evening we should attend a gathering where a female medium channeled to people from different realms. Apparently, they imparted vital information about our current world situation, advising Earth people how to correct their ways. One curiously wondered what psychological considerations needed to be observed here, and how true and reliable all those channelings were. It was going to be quite revealing. We met them at the Country Women's Association. The old building was several stories high, and right on the ground level was the venue, where a reasonably large group of people were gathered. The event was chaired by Merva, the medium, who usually went into a deep trance, during which allegedly another individual from other worlds imparted their wisdom, responding to questions. The hall was also used for other activities by different groups. However, Merva's group met there regularly. Shortly after entering, one became aware of domestic sounds from other occupants elsewhere in the building. The people gathered within were curiously but intently listening to Merva. After everybody had been welcomed, she began to channel to an outlandish alien being from several light years away. During the break, she kept looking in my direction, as if she knew me from before, but I had never met her until then. And while we had cups of tea and biscuits, she approached me, asking if I had time to have a little chat. When the session was over, she asked me what I thought of it, realizing it was my first time. I told her that my friend from WAUFOIC, WAUFOIC group had spoken great things in regard to this gathering, and I was certainly not disappointed. However, needed to clarify matters in relation to what I knew of other beings from elsewhere as aliens, as we were all from the stars, just the way it was considered by a wider community. She was very happy about the idea, asking if we were going to frequent their group next time. As far as I was concerned, coming back would be an excellent idea. Then she asked my name and its meaning, and I explained to her that it was originally Sanskrit and meant the Lord over heavenly bodies. All of a sudden she was ecstatic and began to cry, saying, "We have been told all about you, for we were asking for you, Master. Please stay." This surprised me and my friend. I felt strange and hoped these people did not consider me once again as the Saviour's return. I never believe in pretense or being put on a pedestal to be worshipped. Many greeted me in reverence and tried to come closer with the aim of touching my clothing. This is when I needed to make a few corrections, explaining to them that I was somebody who could help them, but was not interested in being considered the second coming of the great man. Merva and her associates started to question me about my being the heavenly, indeed the Galactic Federation's answer to their prayers. They would not accept a no answer about me not being the one, for they had been told 4 times all about my looks, wisdom, and even my name, starting with the letter J or S. One had the feeling as if they, like many others in the past, wanted to own me. To begin with, I was not religious and very critical about mediumistic activities under the light of psychological study. I was also extremely suspicious about the authenticity of channeling activities, as there were many mediums doing it for fame, self-gratification, and financial gain. Without any prejudice or intolerance, some tend to dream about channeling extragalactic energies from light years away without realizing that it may not be so. In fact, they are so convinced that they were specially chosen to engage in such a divine duty. I was unwilling to deny and yet unable to accept such observations at face value. I seek proof for at least some resemblance of reality, but avoid creating an impression of undermining any new thought, for I understand there are multitudes of unknowns in our lives in a physical universe. After all my studies and research, I feel that life, as we know in its entirety, is probably just an illusion, and we are indeed made up of mathematical equations, for I see mathematics in everything I observe all around me. I still question our daily experiences identified by our 5 senses. Could everything therefore be illusional and visually real at the same time? If so, how are we going to deal with the other human senses, touch, smell, warmth, cold, and all our emotions, feelings of love and hatred? Illusion is something that produces an impression of reality, perception as of visual stimuli that represents what is perceived differently than the way it is in reality. Are we a beautiful artwork within a three-dimensional continuum? Are we creating the illusion of reality by ourselves? If it is so, where were we originally placed? And in what format? With these considerations in mind, one curiously asks why we always make the same mistakes and do the same thing over and over again. What is our real nature, and what indeed is our understanding of the universe and planetary existences from microcosm to macrocosm we are surrounded with? We have seen the effects of positive thinking and the negative, discovered within the human element of life, which proves that we can alter any given outcome and therefore our futures. How come then that it appears as if we are unable to change our lifestyles, places, and all the other features around us by thought alone? Are our thoughts also illusional? What about our dreams? What is real? Is there perhaps an intelligence energy? How can one discover it without forming fanaticism, only scientifically examining it? Consider the animal kingdom. Are they also part of our dreams, living a life of virtual kind, as with everything we observe? On the other hand, our dreams often appear to be more vivid and more real under certain circumstances than our lives in the physical world. Interestingly, mathematics seem to describe the instances of life in the universe with the known data incorporated within the psyche of humans. It remains not as an invention, but a viable discovery. Ancient philosophers seem more and more accurate as we continue to learn about their wisdom. The question remains, what is consciousness, and what is really considered as intelligence? It can be discovered within the ideology behind the matrix, real existence or dream reality. Naturally, one tends to think of this as being either a virtual reality or just an imagined one. When one of us does things to other people, like kissing or slapping the face, those participating in the experience feel it, and it is therefore logical to think that the source in a different reality must feel the same. If this is so, which of the two is the actual reality, and which is the dreamt of or imagined? Furthermore, our dream reality is continually shared. Is there more to what we currently consider and are yet to discover? What is reality? Could there be yet another individual consciousness other than me, capable of watching over my reality, which I consider as real, within that other reality? Is it perhaps a collective consciousness or an individualized totality? Since everything we observe and experience can be explained mathematically, as some prominent men of science claim, from atomic structures to more complex elements, which make the chemicals interact in our brains, thus the activities expressing our thoughts, all we experience are the resultant impressions of physical life. We can indeed create all the shapes and color we observe in nature, utilizing fractal mathematics on our computers. If there is a God, he or she probably is a supreme mathematician, and we are all mathematical expressions and equations. A number of quantum scientists in our times appear to support the notion that we are living in virtual reality, and our lives on Earth are illusional. If this is true, where are we really based, and what are we in reality? Are we perhaps only a consciousness in a fluidic space, capable of expressing any form or shape at will? Are we primarily living in a parallel reality? Are we living in a parallel world, in a parallel universe, expressing a physicality dream. Could that be why our belief systems declare the existence of continuity? Since our genetic codes virtually remain forever, passing from one generation to another, are we perhaps using this avenue for our benefit from within another reality? When there is smoke, where is the fire? Has humanity finally begun to discover the ultimate answer to their lifelong questions? Are we finally beginning to understand ourselves better and finally answer the question to our purpose, understanding where we came from? Recently, children from all around the world, just like my son did, began to speak unusually wisely about the concept of God, claiming it to be a form of energy without any human attributes or personal trends, but being present everywhere and nowhere. Are we originally that energy intelligence, creating exquisite visions of reality? If everything is an illusion and we create it by ourselves, or it is created for us, why do we need all the human trends of falling in love, experiencing life, getting married, having children, even being born, growing into adulthood, enduring old age, and finally expiring? Can we change it all to our liking, remaining young, living forever, or becoming wealthy in every way at will? What is the purpose of all the sufferings we are told we must have? In a quantum way of thinking, even the tiniest particles and their complex combinations share the same mechanics, no matter where they are placed in the known continuum within the universe and beyond. What can be observed in close proximity or light years away, and yet display the sameness? Are we therefore a reflection of what is real? Are we perhaps just computer-generated impulses, based somewhere seemingly dark, like dark energy or black holes? I am comparing and interpreting many great thinkers, philosophers, and psychologists' ideas and wisdom with my own experiences. Remember, our brains constantly remain active even when we sleep. Are we perhaps in touch with the actual reality in the other place and time when we dream, and hopefully remember them? Since one could never approach the fanatical and biased, like for example the witnesses, or members of a dogmatic community, certain questions still remain unanswered. Could one therefore be able to present those queries to what seems totally alien, even ridiculous and not researched into, to people of complete fanaticism? Maybe the citizens of the universal scientific community from within the higher dimensions or intergalactic existence can be approached. I think that one needs to take it more open-mindedly and seriously before discarding the inquiry and consider the alternatives. I have been pondering upon the following questions for a while now. For instance, is free will an illusion? What of the illusion of family togetherness? But that is a different story. On the other hand, people who had traumatic upbringing or hardships tend to lead a life of escapism by creating an illusional world for themselves, and this seems to be where they find acceptance and self-value. If it assists them in a small way, and they are happy with it, I can do naught else but admire them. However, I always prefer to leave a door open, and who knows what can come out into the light, and show us different ways of thinking. Sometimes, seeing where the current world is heading, people create their own ideals, and when shared with others, it can become a shining beacon. I like to think that this could be one of the reasons how certain cults are born, and adherers to such ideals seem to find some consolation and happiness therein. But consolation and happiness can also be discovered in other more positive ways of thinking and living. However, extraterrestrial communique through channeling and the messages relayed should not necessarily be ignored, for they could reveal an individual's psychological makeup, wishes, and ideals, and could also be very unique and possible. On the other hand, I am not in the habit of declaring myself as if I am somebody else, unless, of course, acting on stage as a character portrayed in a play. I choose to remain a person of integrity, and it is like what you see is what you get. Yet many prefer to see me as different, and an individual of higher standing, or not sophisticated, uneducated, and probably an uncultured, ignorant person, even today. But an individual of quality would never declare who he or she is by portraying themselves as someone to be adored. Indeed, I am different, but I do not seek thrills at the expense of others. If people regard me as a way-shower, I humbly accept it, and if people reject me, it is not a concern, and certainly not a tragedy. When we look around us, we come across individuals who are so convinced and believing in everything they are told, and for them there is nothing else outside their own little squares, thus limiting themselves in the extreme. Some open-mindedness can solve the problem. At the opposite side of the scale, I have come across people who considered themselves as the only mediators and channels between humanity and those from different dimensions and other existences within this vast universe. During my career, I also met a number of people claiming to be historic figures, like Napoleon Bonaparte, Lord Nelson, the Apostles Peter and Paul, Merlin, King Arthur, Nostradamus, and many more. Almost all of them believed either being the reincarnation of those great figures or just continued existences of their former lives on Earth. There were also those who needed public understanding, probably needing psychological consideration for their condition. I could not imagine putting myself in a position and assuming an identity to please some people. Although some expected to hear something like this, claiming me to be one of those of higher echelon. Just imagine how average, everyday people would take such a person claiming to be the incarnation or second coming of somebody of great importance in the world's history. If indeed it was real and such a great person walked amongst people, what would they do to that individual? They would probably end up in an institution, or worse still, be completely ignored by the very humans who adhered to his teachings for centuries. As in the past, I have led a wide-ranging study into people's distresses and distinctive dilemmas. Some of those who assumed they had God-given abilities in the name of some belief system, even in the name of spiritualism, were indeed telepaths and mystics upholding spiritual values, which were endlessly preached the world over by almost all religious institutions. At least psychologically we can observe some of the characteristics in people, even claim that those facets may be beneficial for them, as they may find some comfort while overcoming their own personal issues. I believe we need to be prepared for multiple challenges and be open-minded about all kinds of human experience, for we are incapable of knowing everything. By becoming more open-minded, we can more easily accept new sciences and numerous theories about the unique human mind, even in life existing elsewhere other than our fragile, tiny world in a vast universe, which still remains a puzzle despite all our scientific prowess and discoveries. Taking this into account, sometimes going with the flow can be a nice way to observe the very nature of being human. As it was said, in every philosophical and religious ideal, one can always discover something worthwhile, something beautiful. This again takes us to the same conclusion. Where there is smoke, there needs to be fire. Who knows, maybe we will find that fire one day soon. The fact is that the whole of the universe around us is based upon the cause and effect principle. Remember, known existence is defined through our five senses, and what is not definable does not exist for us. We need to observe and feel things before accepting them as real, whereas the sixth sense defines the imagined or the invisible. We also need to revisit scientist Pavlov's experiments, where we discover the need for stimuli for the brain to actively send the requested messages to appropriate parts of the body, whether belonging to a human or animal. And the stimuli can be anything from the sound of bells to the appetizing aroma of food. Here we observe the cause and effect principle in action. Consider ex nihil nihilum. Nothing comes from nothing. My pets respond to the word food, and I know that all pets respond to gentle touch and reward. Animals also dream. When living in Perth, I met a number of psychics I became friends with, and one was Merva, and in her group there were a number of very curious people wanting to know if there was any truth in those endeavors, like communicating with the unknown and mysterious. I discovered the same amongst those attending other spiritual circles, perhaps just to hear something about their loved ones, who had left them some while ago, as observed with all life forms on earth, and which we too must face one day. When the inevitable happens, it always leaves a mysterious but haunting silence, which those left behind cannot cope with well. Even if what is relayed by a psychic medium could be considered as being born within the mind of that individual's rich imagination, the visitor to those gatherings seeking evidence of survival would be helped to renew hope that there is always a possibility for survival and a beautiful future, perhaps even leading one into understanding why it is much better not to dwell on departures, but live in the now. There is always something valuable to look for, and all is not empty or wasted. In those gatherings, people are usually convinced about the presence of healing angels, who are ever ready to help them overcome any ills they may have. It is no different from taking part in religious, sectarian, and cultist assemblies, where adherents believe that by participating in prayer sessions, heavenly energies would heal them and make them whole again. I have known people who ardently desired concentrating their positive thoughts in meditation or praying in deep religious ecstasy, believing the outcome was dependent on their trust and faith in themselves or an outside source of divinity, particularly when they were miraculously healed or became very wealthy. It is proven that thoughts can influence matter. Positive thoughts yield positive results. Here one remembers the biblical account about Jesus' life and teachings. This is where one discovers Jesus having healed the sick and lame. But if you notice, he often told them that their faith has healed them. But what are we really to understand by faith? Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 describes it this way. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It is a proven fact that today when one thinks positively for a positive outcome of any event, one is more likely to achieve it. This can be seen in sporting events and unexpected healing and recovery situations from any ill. In other words, Jesus' words can be interpreted similarly to what we are implying here. Perhaps people need little triggers like self-confidence, courage, prayers, and meditations. But remember, by imagination alone, an individual is quite capable of changing his or her metabolism, even influencing their DNA programming. By thought alone, as scientifically proved many times over, every one of us can influence water molecules. Dr. Imado of Japan has demonstrated this successfully. Then one asks, what else can we influence? Think about it. It sounds so true when we claim that thoughts make us what we are. We are indeed what we think. Sometimes we are forced into playing different roles, and that seems to be the only acceptable way to please certain types of people, especially when one desires to get to know them better. That is probably why, according to the Holy Scripts, an apostle of Jesus exclaimed that he became everything to everyone, obviously within some limits. In reality, if we can accept others as we accept ourselves and are willing to discover how they think and function, we can perhaps open many doors towards a more peaceful existence in the world. But do all those people accept us as we are? Do we truly accept them as they are? Then again, there are groups of people who can do naught else but oppose everything and everybody in the world, in a sense judging the world as something evil and getting worse all the time. They are the kind of people who create hindrances and stumbling blocks out of nothing. They are classified as dreamers of peace, but actually far remove themselves from its ideals. Indeed, a little tolerance and acceptance would go a lot further. When one makes mention of human intelligence, one wonders what level of this is really considered when they conduct their war games. They are probably seen by the intergalactic people as creatures lacking the ability to calculate the result of what 1 + 1 equals. This is true especially when humans conduct their conflicts against each other without the slightest idea of what destruction of life and intelligence they inflict, no matter what color, persuasion, or race they belong to. It is beyond the laws of logic, and therefore, on all fronts, current humanity is in self-destruct mode. Humans today seem to begin their fun games of destruction of their own kind, as well as the world upon which they live, from a very young age. Observe their lifestyles and interests in wiping off the lives of others belonging to different beliefs and ideologies. Even their entertainment is continually based upon the same, from infancy to adulthood, which remains a questionable process. However, they are capable of living creatively, inventively, caringly, and peacefully. Humans were envisaged to become great carers of the planet and each other. When you consider that whenever any movement towards peace around the world is detected, some other more negative element in their thinking is introduced. All intellectual, logical, inventive genius towards reaching the stars with peaceful endeavor is also squashed. This is probably why humanity is not permitted to advance to the far recesses of space. There are those who believe that any warlike thought detected results in the inability to inflict the moon or other bodies around the sun, for humans of this nature may be considered virus-like by the outsiders. Space cannot and must never be used for the purpose of militarization. The Galactic Federation, as some believe exists, can only allow progressive development and not humanity's current trends in fighting efforts on religious or political grounds. Their dreams of space wars are therefore futile. Dogma in any endeavor keeps mankind in dark bondage. Humanity needs to clean up their act and start living in peace without utilizing their advancements for the destruction of life. They are being warned not to continue building destructive elements, engaging in violence against each other, before it is too late. Intergalactic people are not going to interfere with mankind's self-destruct mode, which they have created over the centuries and need to stop by themselves. This may be the last call before the end of their ungrounded reality dreams. Their religious intolerance, military action, and political anomalies must cease. Since I was considered as someone who could bring new ways of thinking, and I accepted others as they were, when Merva claimed that she believed I was the answer to their prayers, I could only respond to her with a positive, "It may be so." We immediately became friends with everyone present at that first session, and I was asked to tell them things at their next gathering. I did so and spoke to them in a very sincere way about how best we, as humans, could help the world become a better place to live, although it was already a most beautiful planet, and that humanity had too many differences and separations due to their belief systems, encouraging them to consider how best they could communicate with each other. They all took my speech as if it was spirit communication from another dimension, due to their belief that someone lecturing on their platform had to be guided by beings from a higher echelon. They had been so conditioned that inspirational speaking could only come from the spirit world. In the quantum way of thinking, it was probably best to give it a small chance of being so, but knowing what I knew, it was better to go with the flow for the time being. However, by nature being a very curious individual, I was prepared to experiment with some of my theories and personal discoveries. Besides, if there was something valid in interdimensional communication and could be repeated in a variety of situations, it would be worthwhile to conduct further tests. Personally, I always believed that if everyone accepted each other and got together in amicable and acceptable ways, they could at least start the process of living in peace. Religions were allegedly there to teach them how to achieve this state of being, but throughout the centuries, their leadership, supposedly following the founders of their belief systems, utilized all the knowledge available to them to only control the masses while adding a few more rules and regulations into their schooling. Some of the guests at that meeting declared that they sensed something extraordinarily spiritual about me and said they knew they could trust me in every way, and I had every intention not to disappoint them. Merva also echoed their words and feelings. They all declared that they recognized something unusual, perhaps divine, something extraordinary and mysterious. However, I was not interested in collecting worshippers, although a few other friends told me that due to their desperate needs, when and if they wanted to worship someone, let them do so if it helped them. I found it impossible to accept, even if they might have wanted me to do so. I preferred to psychologically show them the way towards happiness they could find within. I was not going to become a god to be worshipped. Besides, the world was full of them anyway. All I wanted them to do was to accept me as a great friend, so that we could get to know each other better. If I could help them with their emotional needs, I would feel fulfilled. None of my new friends were entirely knowledgeable about my professional background, but I was intent to clarify matters at a more suitable time. For now, I needed to keep quiet, as there was mention of psychologists being disliked amongst the gathered. The attitude observed was similar to those religious groups when psychologists were portrayed as if they were up to no good. It was probably due to a variety of false assumptions, or else fear-based, for some people did not desire the real truth to come to the surface. Perhaps by explaining a few facts and fallacies, one could prepare them to accept that psychology was not an evil science. This reminded me of people my ex-partner associated with, for they did not even want to know the truth, only assuming to understand it. This is undeniably very reminiscent of their founder's claims to know ancient Greek, when in reality he had no knowledge of it. While I was associated with Merva's group, I was asked if there was any chance for me to channel in their midst to the divine energies, since I had given them a taste of it when I conducted a few experiments. They all wanted me to do so whenever they got together. Firstly, I did not desire to be seen as a psychic medium. And secondly, I did not want to stop Merva's activities, for they were clearly assisting people with their psychological needs without naming them as such. I repeated my experiment from time to time, but they did not realize it was an experiment, although it was clearly explained to them. And who knows, I was also doing some good. It was probably better this way. My way of talking to people was specifically a direct approach in helping them to think positively and start living life without a worry in the world. I was not keen about delivering imagined messages from the deceased in the most negative way, as a number of psychics were known to do for a fee. However, a few strange things began to happen all over the country. Especially during my stay in Perth, some aerial phenomena seemed to excite a few people. I believe that those strange happenings could not have been because of my presence. I just happened to be there at the right time. Especially during my stay in Perth, some aerial phenomena seemed to excite a few people. I believe that those strange happenings could not have been because of my presence. I just happened to be there at the right time. Before going any further, I will have to consider a few important issues. For example, when speaking with my beloved mother after so many years of not seeing and talking to her, it was so exciting to hear her voice, which had not changed from how I remembered, although some of her words sounded as if she had no front teeth. She told me much had happened, and because I had not seen her for a long time, nor spoken to her face to face for so many years, I would probably think she had not changed. When speaking with my brother, he also sounded just as I remembered him. Since I was unaware of any electronic device which could capture the conversation, I invented a way of recording their voices, along with mine, as we heartily conversed. Maybe I was inspired to do that. For many years, my so-called friends, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and my ex-wife blocked every opportunity using all kinds of excuse, such as my mother being a wicked witch, as I have already spoken of. Telephone conversations were very expensive then, and many people did not speak with their relatives as often as ideally desired. Besides, my seemingly loving wife often begged me not to talk to the witch if I loved her, and so I remained with the only remaining choice of corresponding with my mother in written form and many photographs. With the emergence of political circumstances and my migration to Australia, I was unable to see my parents for many decades. Hearing my mother's voice and recording it was the most exciting event imaginable. I asked her how things were and how my father was. Her answer to that was extremely hesitant, as she said he was asleep at the moment. But last year we had lost our Aunt Perlanti. She might have suffered cancer. And before her passing she spoke of a white boy waiting to go with her. Who was that white boy? I wondered. Was it perhaps her hallucination whilst she was completely alert during her passing? I never had a chance or satisfactory answer to discover the reality. While I conversed with them, I felt as if being transported to where they were gathered. I felt so certain at that moment that I was there, seeing them physically as they were, but could not see my father. After that conversation, I found myself suddenly back in my unit in Perth. I noticed my father sitting on one of the chairs in the lounge. I must have been so tranced that I was having a vision without it being physically real. But his presence was very physical in appearance, his mature age apparent. I knew I made a silly mistake while talking to my beloved mother, wishing for the two lovers, meaning her and my father, to be happy all the time. For she asked me, "What do you mean, son?" I had to explain that they certainly accepted each other. However, I felt mildly embarrassed about my innocent inquiry. She was silent for a few seconds. In reality, they have never been happy with each other. Later, my brother explained that Dad was not here, and I asked them to give my regards to him when he was home, and if he wanted to hear from me, we could talk with him next time. At first, he was asleep, and soon after, he was not there. It did not sound right. But I did not say anything about what I thought. However, seeing him in my lounge was unusual, and so I took it as an hallucination. Can you imagine how happy we all were after that occasion, when we were finally able to talk to each other? I still keep and treasure that recording after all these decades. But my sensation of being transported there during the conversation, and at the end finding myself back at my Perth address, where I saw my father as physical as he would have been when alive, was extraordinary. He spoke to me with a voice I remembered, saying, "It is time for me to go, son." After that conversation, at a very late hour of the night, I noticed a very strange ball of light shaped like a sphere against the cloudless, starry night sky, becoming apparent on the right-hand side of the city as seen from my balcony, facing the glorious lights of Perth. The city looked like a fantastic dream, and a ball of light was just above the Bursford Casino, as it was then, slowly moving towards the left. During this time I felt inspired to draw the portrait of a beautiful girl with gorgeous blonde hair and full of smiles. But there was something most definitely different about her. She had a pair of cat's eyes. I spoke about it to the members of the WAUFOIC, WAUFOIC research group, and showed them the image I had drawn. However, I was not sure whether it actually had anything to do with the sighting I witnessed. We made further inquiries and discovered that during that sighting there were no aeroplanes, police helicopters, light aircraft, or any balloons in the sky. And there were no meteorites, comets, or any satellites visible. Additionally, a few other people had witnessed the phenomena that night as well, but my news had somehow been filtered to the media. A few opportunist journalists decided to interview me with their 1,000 questions at the group meeting, and soon after several articles with my picture and the image I had drawn were published. One very popular magazine even printed my color photographs with that interview about the sighting. Alas, they described me as an Indian psychic and gave me a few additional and different names. It was so hilarious to rediscover oneself under different identity and names. It still makes me laugh about those titles, identifications, and additional names. Seeing my images and the drawing I made of that unusual girl were pleasant experiences I had not expected in my wildest dreams, but was not pleased about being described as someone I was not. It was also about this time when many more unusual phenomena were reported by a large cross-section of people, including pilots and even police officers. One might easily think that perhaps they were under a lot of stress and their minds were creating outlandish but believable phenomena. Was it to make people realize that there were many other things in life to learn from, and even to relax their minds by imagining something totally harmless? Too many incidents like that might have declared something significant and unusual, but not like closed-mind fanatics would describe it to be. Can anybody see others' imagination as physical realities and photograph them? Every individual's experience of seeing and relating to things can be different. When you think about it, we are like an island in the midst of an interminable grid of relationships with other people and everything around us. Here is an interesting consideration. What about our relationship with ourselves? Nonetheless, we are all conscious of self. Remember also that we tend to ask, who am I? What do I want? What is my purpose here? Am I doing the right things? Am I really happy with things I do? We can certainly try to ignore them. It is our choice, but we cannot run away from them. Have you ever asked yourself, what does my vision point at? It really sounds so unusual that one can almost call it madness. It is strange to query something like that, but it is equally important to question how we relate to self, for it affects how we relate to others around us. Considering the people at gatherings like Merva's, I thought that they would perhaps appreciate this wisdom. My intention was to assist the inquirer to discover self in the real world, and create an interest for those who might never have thought of it before. Consider our lives on earth. After our birth, we begin to discover self, which is our starting point, and also end with that self. Remember, we are living in societies within which selflessness is, for instance, considered as a virtue, and selfishness is seen as being evil. For my ex-wife, the dedicated witness, everything regarding one's self was a sin, especially when it concerned my interests. Remember, she was constantly preached about regarding this issue. On the other hand, I dared not say anything of value, for she was never permitted to listen to me. One naturally questions what are self, selflessness, and selfishness. What should one understand of the word self, and even question what self-actualization, self-alienation, self-sacrifice, and ego are? Have you heard or pondered on any of these concepts? The witnesses were liberally talking about these issues with the aim of convincing their dedicated members that their indirect slavery to a foreign god, not the one Christian Bible recognizes, was the only way towards everlasting life after Armageddon. Every one of us, except the witnesses, love to think independently. just to be able to live by our own awareness and spirituality. But independent thinking is literally a taboo as far as witnesses are concerned. It really means to have the freedom and courage to be ourselves. Magda never believed this to be true, nor could she accept that everyone has the right to live to the full and not going in the opposite direction, like self-denial and repression. We can perhaps call it self-deception, and fanatical belief systems are well known to foster exactly this. Unfortunately, there are many examples of this anomaly all around us. I also experienced them and was forced to deny my own self for a long time when supposedly married to my beloved wife. In fact, I seemed to need her permission to breathe, eat, laugh, or listen to music, let alone live. I dared not be me without her approval. We had only think of our priorities during my marriage as dictated by what she was dedicated to. She had absolutely no respect for me while demanding it from me, constantly hammering me with respect must be earned. What I am saying here is not a complaint, nor am I agonizing over my shattered dreams. Respecting one's self is self-acceptance. None of us need to deny or deceive our own selves. The witnesses could not, nor can ever be told anything contrary to what they want to believe. Self-denial to please Jehovah or his governing body. In fact, they are great separatists when you consider that they all belong to a subservient class, whereas members of their governing body, comprised of uninspired men who are fallible, as they now describe themselves to be, claim they are God's only spokesman on earth. However, to value ourselves is to live in reality and the real truth, and be able to speak of our innermost being as we actually are, and not as we may be dictated by others. This would never work for my ex-wife, who could only bitterly criticize me when I made mention of my thoughts, trying to explain that it is an obligation to our own rights and freedom to be and to live. In other words, our lives do not belong to someone else, and we are never obliged to live according to someone else's dictates and expectations. Talking to such people is like talking to a brick wall. To start with, we need to love our own lives and all our experiences. To value self is the noblest deed everyone should seek for, and it is not selfishness. Those who are always depressed and suffering emotional pain are the ones who often lack self-esteem and have self-alienated themselves. Over the years, my observations proved the reality of witnesses in general belonging to that category. One can confidently claim that they are not fully in touch with their inner world, their needs, thoughts, and values. This can also happen to people who do not belong to fanatical groups, who are confused about their place in the world. In the study of psychology, we discover that there exists a strong connection between an individual's self-esteem and their mental well-being. It is the same between one's self-esteem and work-related attitudes and relations with others. In short, valuing oneself, the importance of living, and well-being need to be considered thoroughly by observing people's behavior towards others, wherein the self is either accepted or denied. We need to understand what self-esteem truly means, and this is also where the significance of true autonomy shines brilliantly. When ego is correctly understood, it does not become a hindrance to our spiritual greatness, for without it, we can never be fulfilled. My ex-wife belongs to a group of people who leave all control of their lives to their governing body without the need for self-recognition. Those who cannot blindly be led to slavery of the spiritual kind are disfellowshipped and shunned, many of whom are considered and judged as evil apostates, who the witnesses greatly fear, for they are the true way-showers to freedom. This may be a wake-up call for adherers to dogma. The unfortunate limitation to anyone's success is not due to lack of ability, but a belief that success is outside one's perception of self. Undeniably, it is how some people see themselves. When we question cult promoters, like my ex-wife, they would probably answer it positively, saying that they are happy. Magda believed she was pleasing God by pleasing her brothers in faith, while denying her right to be happy. But when considering those shunned members of the cult, their responses would be one of indifference. We realize that unhappiness is a side effect of self-denial, and it is not much different than assuming happiness as being not for me and suffering from the I don't deserve to be happy syndrome. On the other hand, if one feels hindered from doing whatever one needs to do, it does not always mean the lack of self-esteem, but feeling inadequate to the challenges of life. Furthermore, in psychology, it is considered that anybody feeling undeserving of joy and reward suffers from a lack of self-esteem. Remember, self-respect can only be possible through recognizing one's own worth. I hope those who promote the idea of self-respect needing to be earned will take note of this. Why should I be happy? Do I believe, accept, and trust myself? Do I need to doubt my inner self? Think of being loved, and you will be. Do you feel fit to live? You need to have the self-assurance that your mind is working well. Are you worthy to live? You too might have been forced to believe that you do not deserve to have a happy existence. Believe in the Word of God and let the Church take care of you. Even the Holy Scriptures emphasize the importance of absolute freedom and never encourage you into slavery, but the Word of God has been twisted to suit cult promoters. You need to recognize and accept your right to live and be happy. The truth is that we can only do it by ourselves, and not expect it to be done for us by some exterior source of divinity. Remember the saying, God helps those who help themselves. When we feel loved and respected, we treat others the same way and expect them to treat us likewise. Consider the wise words, love thyself. I know that low esteem creates despair and anxiety, whereas positive self-esteem is not egotism, but is related to conscious pleasure for positive endeavors. And remember, positive self-esteem always declares, I can. Alas, many are led to believe that they are unworthy sinners in the eyes of a great God. They consider pride as a negative attitude only, but positive pride cannot be something wicked, and their standpoint is almost like declaring that a sin of pride is something totally against life and being alive. Self-esteem is not self-glorification at the expense of others. It is also not superiority. Unfortunately, the witnesses' governing body proves to be supportive of self-glorification at the expense of their worldwide followers. In reality, self-esteem is a state of not being at war with one's self and others, but Jehovah's Witnesses have proved themselves to be at war with life and those whom they judge as wrongdoers. By shunning people who they consider sinning against their organization, they prove how much they hate the world, in contrast to the Bible principle of love. Perhaps the friends from other dimensions could provide us with great wisdom to find real happiness by becoming more aware of ourselves and valuing the importance of self-esteem. Or is it already within our reach? While in Britain, and also occasionally visiting the States, I discovered a few seemingly highly knowledgeable psychics who had certainly learned from a variety of books, presenting their know-how to groups of people as channeled information. Some of them could easily just be themselves, not necessarily channeling to higher intelligences. It was confusing why some of the endlessly repeated wisdom had to be presented in a theatrical fashion. Are Jehovah's Witnesses and the like any different? Maybe that is what people in general want. Maybe it is just another way of sharing the treasures they had found along the way, and many are keenly interested in learning new things, while adoring the alleged channelers for their great abilities. But it all comes at a price. I fondly remember the excellent words of William Cowper. Existence is a strange bargain. Life owes us little. We owe it everything. The only true happiness comes from squandering ourselves for a purpose